For the longest time, I didn't use social media pretty much at all. Unless you count YouTube, which I guess you could. But anyway, most of the time my phone was just sitting there on the desk and I didn't touch it. Sometimes the entire day would go by and I hadn't even picked it up once. Because Instagram doesn't really do it for me. Twitter always just seemed like a wasteland of nothing of interest. Facebook I never really even used at all. TikTok I tried out but kinda hated it. So for the longest time I genuinely thought I might just be immune to the effects of social media. And I was kind of fascinated by all the people who were hooked on it, who would just spend hours and hours mindlessly scrolling through their feeds. I thought that wasn't ever gonna happen to me, because well, I'd been on the internet for decades already. I'd had a smartphone for like 15 years as well, so I thought it was pretty safe to assume that these things just didn't affect me, that maybe I was just built different or something. But as it turns out, my brain's still fundamentally built like everyone else's. Who would have thought? And therefore, it's just as prone to social media addiction as anyone else's. The difference was, I just hadn't found the right platform yet. However, at some point, I believe it was early 2024, I found my gateway drug. The Google Newsfeed thingy. The thing on your Android that just feeds you one news article after another, that are actually relevant to your interests. And I think that's the key here. And maybe that's very obvious, but the feed needs to be relevant to your interests. And these other platforms just never served me anything I cared about all too much. But suddenly here's this thing that's actually attuned to my own interests and serves me one article after another of stuff I actually care about. And it just keeps going and I kinda got hooked on it. I would wake up in the morning and pull up the feed and start scrolling. And honestly, it wasn't so bad. I genuinely didn't mind it. I'd spend maybe 20-30 minutes doing that, and then I would get up and go about my day. And I generally didn't really check it for the rest of the day either. It was more a part of my morning routine, and it didn't really disrupt my day or bother me that I was doing that. It wasn't really essential, but it also didn't feel like it was ruining my life, you know? It was 20-30 minutes of my day, and that was that. And in hindsight, looking back, the most important thing was that it didn't really have its claws in me properly, and I didn't obsess over it. So I didn't think too much about it, to be honest. But fairly soon after, another app came along, one that I had already used sporadically for years, but almost entirely as a utility, not as a social media platform. And that app was of course Reddit. Whenever I needed an answer to some very specific question, Reddit would usually provide an answer. Even if I googled it, it would often lead me to Reddit. And for years that's how I used it, as a tool to figure something out. And it was great, and I didn't really even consider it a social media app, although it very much is one. However, at some point I was just browsing on there, and I would find something interesting, some interesting community, or some funny posts, and I would click the button and join those communities. And before I knew it, my homepage started to feed me a slew of posts that were actually relevant to my interests. So I found myself drawn to the app more and more, and I started to spend more and more time on it. And of course, one thing led to another, and I found more interesting communities. And very quickly I had an unending stream of content to scroll through every day. And now, every morning, instead of opening up the Google News feed, I would hop on Reddit instead. And not only that, I would engage with the content. Because where the Google News feed is basically just a passive thing that you don't really interact with, Reddit is built to interact with. You're encouraged to comment and get into discussions, or more often than not, arguments with other people. And to no one's big surprise, this is a lot more engaging. And before I knew it, I was hooked. And while checking Reddit in the morning was already clearly not an improvement over the Google News feed, that still wasn't a huge problem. However, my Reddit browsing didn't stop there, because all of a sudden I would check it multiple times a day. In fact, soon enough I would check it as soon as I was even mildly bored for like 2 seconds. I was in the middle of cooking dinner and had a minute to waste. I was on Reddit. I was watching a movie. and it got to a spot where nothing interesting happened for like 30 seconds, and I was on Reddit. It got so bad that I would be playing a video game, and the loading screen was taking more than a couple seconds, and I would just grab my phone and pull up Reddit. And that was basically when I realized it's a problem, because I would feel this pull towards my phone constantly. I'd programmed my brain to instantly go for my phone, as soon as there was a brief moment of nothing much going on. Now keep in mind, prior to this, I would often go my entire day without touching my phone. It would just be sitting there on the desk most of the time. If I needed to look something up, I would grab it. If I went out and wanted to listen to a podcast, I would grab it. Or if I needed GPS to get me where I was going, I'd use my phone. But I never used it compulsively. And I definitely never spent hours per day doom scrolling. But then I found myself doing exactly that. And it was alarming. But I kept doing it. I knew it was a problem. I didn't like what was happening. But I still kept doing it. And the issue was that I could sort of justify it, because it wasn't like it was getting in the way of me being productive. I was still doing what I needed to do during my day. I was just wasting my time on Reddit instead of a million other things I could have been doing, wasting my time with. However, I really didn't like the hold my phone now had on me. I didn't like that compulsion to pick it up every time I was even remotely bored. For just a second or two. So I decided to stop cold turkey. And it actually took maybe a week or more before things went back to the way they had been. Before that compulsion to constantly grab my phone was gone. And I actually kept that up for a while. Until one morning I decided to casually just give Reddit a little peek. And you know what? For some time I actually managed to keep my Reddit browsing pretty casual. I kept it within reason. But of course, as with any addiction, things can just spiral out of control again. And of course they did. Because within probably like a month, I was back to compulsively grabbing my phone anytime I wasn't fully engaged with whatever I was doing. And of course I quickly realized what was happening. And of course I still kept doing it. And you know what? This whole thing continued for like a year, basically uninterrupted. Until I just had to admit that it really wasn't doing me any favors. And that more than anything I just hated the constant nagging compulsion to grab my phone. Because it told me that I wasn't in control of my life. Because I wasn't making a decision to pick up that phone, I just did it. It was automatic, it was second nature, and I really didn't like that. So eventually I decided to put an end to it again. Now, was this the most crippling and most destructive addiction in the history of man? No, of course not. But it was affecting my mental health to some extent, and not in a positive way. So it's just better to be rid of it, right? But I know a lot of people are stuck in this same insidious rut, and that's not good. And having been there now myself, it sucks to see it. Because I know what it's doing to people now. And unfortunately, I don't have a solution for it. And I don't see it going away either. But if it's a problem for you, maybe admit it. And maybe take a look at quitting, right? That's pretty much the best I can do. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe instead of dropping a like or subscribing to the channel for more content like this, or commenting below, you just put that phone down instead. And go outside and talk to another human being or something. Yeah, how about let's do that instead. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for today, and I'll see you next time.